Hi there, and welcome to the Android Show. Today we're bringing you the latest on Android 14 and getting a peek into the hottest new devices, wearable, foldable.
All of the ables.
Yes.
But first, a little bit about us, your co-hosts for this episode of the Android Show. I'm Rebecca Gutteridge. I work in the Android platform, leading the System UI DevRel team at Google, driving quality for all things UI in the ecosystem.
And I am Madona Wambua, author, Android GDE, and host of the podcast Tech Talks with Madona.
So, Madona, one of the things I'm so excited about is we released the second developer preview of Android 14 yesterday. We are providing a safer device environment with more user controls with selected photo access and helpful changes to notifications.
Oh, great. Well, I am really excited to see all the new foldables and get a sense of what this means for us developers. And how can we make our application adapt to the new foldable designs?
Yeah, me too.
Okay, to kick off the show, we'll be exploring the latest in large screens with tablets and foldables.
Then, in the world of quality, we'll get to see the conversation I had with the people building app quality insights in Android Studio, helping developers see and act on user crashes with data integrated from Crashalytics, all within your project.
Later in the show, we'll jump into a Math Skills series on Compose layout and modifier with a live Q&A with the team.
Right. And there's still time to ask questions. Just tweet us using #AskAndroid.
So many devices, so much to talk about. All right, let's get to it. First up, foldables. I'll be visiting some of our friends from MWC to see the latest releases.
Okay, so which devices are you most excited about then?
Whichever one I get to put my hands on. They're all great to me.
I am an Android engineer for a higher education app, and a few years ago, optimizing for large screens was challenging. But now, alongside the growth in large screen devices and new innovative tools which make developing easier, what are the latest innovation in hardware, and what does that mean for us developers? First up, at MWC, I visited the Oppo booth where I got to hold their latest foldable, the Find and to Flip.
I think the most important feature would be the camera, just the fireplace, and you can take a selfie very easily. You can choose the music very quick in the outer screen, so you don't have to open the phone. And the other one, we provide some very handy tool, like a calendar event, like a timer. We should remember the button could not be too small, or that would be very hard to use. Because the screen is quite bigger, so I think we can have a lot of opportunity in this screen.
Next up, I was excited to learn more about the launch of the Phantom V Fold.
When the device is folded, thanks to its micro-curved screen, it is like a perfect fit. When the device is unfolded, it should be useful in many occasions. So if you look at the business, so the large screen provides a vital tool for meetings, for presentations, improving the way of communicating. If you look at it from entertainment perspective, the screen again offers an immersive visual experience which is perfect when playing a game or watching a video or a movie. We expect the developers to take the full advantage of the size of the screen, the powerful technology that is embedded into the Phantom V Fold, and of course the iOS 13, which is our own operating system that we have specifically developed for this device, providing the best user experience.
Next, I headed to Honor to hear all about their new devices, the Honor Magic VS.
Honor Magic VS comes with a 12.9mm super slim and gapless design. It's powered by the all-new Magic Operating System 7.1, which is based on Android 13. It provides a number of smart features that enhance productivity. Simply swipe down with 3 fingers, you can save the online articles anytime. Honor Magic VS support vertical split screen for both single app and 2 apps. What's more, the horizontal split screen. You can enjoy game and watch favorite video at the same time. We would love to invite more developers to join us and co-create unique experience for Foldable.
It was super exciting to get hands-on with the next generation of light screen devices. As a developer, I wanted to know what this continued growth in light screens means for me. They are obviously here to stay. So I caught up with Ade Oshinai to find out more.
So this is the start of an exciting new phase for the large screen ecosystem. The devices you've just seen, they cover a variety of price points. They also highlight the diversity of types of foldables that are available in the ecosystem. And finally, they also demonstrate the number of OEMs who are committing to this space. So we're very excited about them.
So how does this growing large screen ecosystem impact the way developers should be thinking about their apps?
Well, it means you've got to jettison some old assumptions about the size of the device, the orientation, the different ways it can flex and adapt. Can it fold? How big is it? What happens when I rotate it? Things like that. But it's also a chance for you to think about use cases that go beyond one app, that involve multitasking or multi-window.
How is Google helping developers get their apps large screen ready?
Well, there's 2 buckets. One is tooling. So that's, of course, Jetpack Window Manager, but it's also the resizable emulator so that you can see your app across a variety of form factors. The second is what we think of as guidance, and that's everything from the quality guidelines to the canonical layouts, the large screen gallery, and finally there's the case studies so that you can see what other developers have done and what to aspire to.
What do you say to a developer wondering, where do I start?
Well, I'd say you're in the right place, and there's 2 things you need. 1, test on the resizable emulator and on a diverse range of real devices, experience the diversity of the ecosystem. The second, I would say, is keep an eye on the devices that are launching throughout the year. Each one is going to offer exciting new possibilities that you should explore.
Check out all the resources you need to optimize for light screens at developer.android.com.
Welcome to Now on Android, your ongoing guide to what's new and notable in the world of Android development. Android 14 Developer Preview 2 is now available, with additional enhancements to privacy, security, performance, customization, and more. Examples include changes that reduce the amount of CPU time your app gets once it goes into the cache state, selected photos access, which allows Android 14 users to grant partial access to their media library when an app requests media permissions, and regional preferences, which enable users to personalize temperature units, the first day of the week, and numbering systems. We announced upcoming policy changes to improve both Wear OS app quality and app presentation within Google Play. In addition, Wear OS apps must target API level 30, Android 11, to continue being discoverable for devices that run Android 11 Plus. The new requirements will come into effect on Google Play starting August 31st, 2023. Until then, the existing policies will be in place. The overall mandatory Wear OS app review process remains unchanged. The full Android Basics with Compose course is now available, covering how to create Android apps using Jetpack Compose, exploring fundamentals of the Kotlin programming language, Android app architecture, commonly used Jetpack libraries, and Vue Compose interoperability along the way. We continued the Mad Skills series focused on Jetpack Compose layout and modifiers, with 1 new episode on advanced layout concepts, where Simona covered how to handle more complex layout requirements, harnessing the power of layout, phase, and constraints to build custom layouts in Compose. Be sure to stay tuned for the Compose Layout live Q&A coming up next in the series. We had some interesting articles. Roberto covered how to leverage multi-window and activity embedding to help your users multitask while taking advantage of increased screen real estate. Tomasz illustrated how to go about accessing composables from UI Automator, leveraging modifier.testTag. In videos, Luke covered new capabilities in Block Store, which is our API to help your users seamlessly transfer to a new device, such as a new key value pair feature that allows you to save up to 64 times more data, along with the ability to pair binary packets with a key. Thomas detailed how to use TensorFlow Lite with Google Play Services, now Android's official ML inference engine. It can help reduce your app size by up to 5 megabytes, make sure your app is up to date with the latest stable version of TensorFlow Lite, and supports GPU acceleration. Rebecca explored custom drawing in Jetpack Compose, including drawscope, drawing modifiers, understanding the coordinate system, drawscope transformations such as scale, translate, rotate, and inset, and how to use all of this to draw a filled, smoothed, animated path. In episode 195 of the Android Developers Backstage podcast, Chet and Roman talked to Jeff and Anton from the mainline team about modular system components and the new SDK extension framework, which lets you access them. Remember to like, subscribe, share, stay safe, and come back here soon for another update from the Android developer universe.
Did you know 88% of people would delete an app due to bugs and glitches? Helping developers build quality user experiences is close to my heart, and I wanted to learn more about how developers have managed crashes over the years. So I spoke with Anise Davis. You've been in the mobile development space for a long time. Can you tell us how developers used to think about crashes?
In the early days, developers cared deeply about user crashes, but they didn't have the tools to replicate or debug the issue, or to even understand which users were being impacted. I remember spending lots of time trying to reproduce issues based on minimal information from bug reports. Once, I was attempting to debug an experience that was only happening in a specific country, and no matter how many times I tried to, I was unable to reproduce it. It wasn't until I traveled there that I realized people were often using 2G. It never dawned on me to check the connection type.
It sounded like that was tricky for devs and users.
It was definitely challenging, but over time, more tools became available. I remember using open source community solutions that would send the crashes to a backend server. And then several big tech companies actually created their own remote crash solutions. And then entered Crashlytics, which changed the game. We could now know which devices were experiencing issues, could be notified of trending issues, and finally, we were able to show non-technical stakeholders the crashes visually. One time, my team received crash reports for a particular screen of the Meetup app, but we could never reproduce the issue given how inconsistent it was. Crashlytics helped us to narrow down which features to examine. We found a crash that was due to a null pointer exception. It was on some data that we never expected to be null, so it didn't even seem like that crash should be possible. An engineer on my team was able to use the data from Crashlytics to uncover that the source was a race condition. That was leading to the null, and then he was able to fix it.
In 2022, we announced the App Quality Insights window in Android Studio, which helps you discover, investigate, and reproduce issues reported by Crashlytics within the context of your local project. I wanted to take a behind-the-scenes peek at where this idea came from. So I spoke with David, a software engineer on the Firebase team who worked on the initial prototype.
The idea for V-integration came from a quarterly hack week where we're able to experiment on our own projects. We know that Android developers use both the Firebase console and Android Studio, so I had an idea to integrate Firebase into Android Studio to reduce their need to switch between the two. The first prototype for this project was actually an integration with performance monitoring, but we realized that Crashlytics, which helps developers track, prioritize, and fix crashes faster, would have a much bigger impact on developer workflow as the integration into Android Studio. So we pivoted in that direction instead, and the rest is history.
And how did you iterate on the original idea?
Oh, well, once we launched the early developer preview, we tested it with a few internal Google teams, and they loved it. We also started testing this with Android developers as part of an early access program. They had some really valuable feedback that helped us decide what to build. An example of this is the Notes feature in Crashlytics. Several teams gave us feedback that it was a very important part of their flow. So of course we added it to AQI. Actually, Anise was one of the developers who tested AQI.
I was truly happy to be able to go directly from a link in the stack trace to the code. It was that feature in Android Studio that you never knew you needed. I especially like that you can filter issues based on the different variants in your app.
How has AQI helped you at Meetup?
We make heavy use of the internal testing track of Google Play. Being able to find and fix crashes that are limited to our internal company means fewer crashes for end users. Every engineer that I know and work with is passionate about delivering performant quality code. App Quality Insights is the next step in the evolution of crash management. It can help engineers have more agency over addressing crashes while they also work on exciting new features.
So there you have it. We're continuing to build features and improvements for AQI. Check it out in the latest version of Android Studio. And now, it's time for the Android Halftime Show, starring Madona.
Who were you expecting? The other Madonna?
Well, you are our star. Anyways, can you believe that we're already halfway through the show? We've seen some incredible new Android devices. So what was one of your favorites?
For me, it was the experience from the Flip and the Foldables.
I mean, it's amazing to see the innovation on these new hardware.
And there's still more exciting things coming up next.
Yes, we'll be answering your questions about Compose layouts and modifiers live on the show.
So stick around to submit your question. Just use the hashtag AskAndroid.
And coming up next, Madona and some of her friends in the Android Google Developer Experts program are going to tell us more about what they love about being in the Android dev community and being involved as an Android GDE.
So stick around. I am excited for you to hear from us about that.
Okay, so a halftime show? You gonna sing and dance?
It is not that kind of half show.
Okay, we'll go to karaoke tonight then.
I'm on it.
To me, the GDE community is like a family, always there to offer support. Over the past few years, we've continued to stay connected online and have unlocked a creative network of amazing experts from all around the world. I invited a few GDEs from the community to share what it means to them to be a GDE. Ahmed, good to see you again.
Hey Madonna, always a pleasure talking to you.
How has your GDE experience been so far?
It has been tremendously amazing. Just being able to connect with the different people from around the world. We've actually become friends now, and we've also become connections on a technical level as well. That is just indescribable.
I'm with you on the importance of the community, Ahmed.
Hey Dinora, how has being a GDE impacted your work and life?
I was actually recruited for my current role a while ago in a conference where I was giving a talk about Kotlin. Since then, I've been speaking about security, modern Android development, life cycles, and how we can use flows in Compose to update user interfaces. I actually use my daily work as a playground where I can learn modern Android elements such as Compose. Hey Harun, what's your advice for someone that wants to become a GDE?
Be consistent and try to have someone to hold you accountable. Like when I was writing, I saw I wasn't that active enough, so I had to find a way or a method for me to be consistent in writing and improve my skills as well. Zara, how has the community evolved since you started as an Android developer?
I think there's been a lot more involvement with women, and we see more women speakers on bigger stages, not just in meetups, but like in Google I/O or the Android Dev Summit, and I think it's really amazing to see. Anis, what role has the Android Dev and the GDE community played in your career journey?
When I first became a GDE, the opportunity helped to open a lot of doors for me, and it really helped to boost my confidence, both of which had a part to play in my journey to where I'm now VP of Engineering. Aside from that, the community is a great sounding board to solve any technical problems. And more importantly, it helps me to stay technical and keep learning.
I could not agree more, Anis.
Madonna, how did you become part of the GDE community?
Using my Java knowledge, I decided to develop my first Android app. I was so proud of being able to develop something from start to finish and felt I was able to get instant feedback and recognition from the people using my app. I started doing talks and sharing knowledge online. When a friend of mine recommended the GDE program to me, I saw this as an opportunity to keep doing these things, but with a bigger reach.
Founded in 2012, Clue was one of the first femtech companies. Clue's mission is to empower women and people with cycles to take charge of their reproductive health. My name is Tilbe Saltan. I'm a senior Android developer at Clue. Being part of such a journey by developing a product to support millions of people with trustworthy information, data-driven tools, and emotional support is very motivating and fulfilling. We adopted Compose because our team noticed that our existing code base, with its heavy reliance on custom views and hard-coded theme values, was limiting our ability to scale and provide the most value to our users. As we adopted Compose, we noticed a massive improvement in our productivity. Our development speed increased twofold and in some cases up to 3 times as fast compared to working with our legacy code base. Compose enabled us to roll out a design system that is integrated with our custom theming. Compose also helped us with testability and accessibility and enabled us to efficiently build more complex UIs, especially our varying animations. Jetpack Compose increases developer velocity by eliminating boilerplate code and improves UI testing, which is always painful for Android developers. Performance has been really positive with Compose. By using Compose, we rebuilt some of our features such as cycle, calendar, and tracking view. Rewriting a couple of complex UIs with Compose reduced the number of issues we received for those features, as well as the ANR rates on Android Vitals. We are confident that users are experiencing less bugs. Our team was really excited about rebuilding the app with Compose, and our usage of Compose has been attracting more candidates for hiring who would want to work with latest development tools and methods. In 2020, we decided to migrate the app from Java to full Kotlin, and most striking consequence was the decrease in the numbers of issues that we received in regular basis. Compared to Java, Kotlin allows us to produce the same output with more readable and less lines of code, which makes it much more fun and exciting to work with. I recommend Compose to other engineers because Compose is a declarative UI framework backed with efficient and powerful APIs and components, which enables developers to produce the same output with less lines of code. And that results in improved readability and easier maintenance, as well as increased efficiency and productivity. As Compose continues to evolve, there will be more open source libraries and plugins. That means that there will be more opportunities for developers to share knowledge, and it will support a fertile ground for innovation.
Hello, and welcome to this live Q&A on Compose layouts and modifiers. If you've been following the most recent Mad Skills series so far and have any questions, now's your chance to receive answers to those questions. I'm your host today. My name is Chris Ariola, and I'm a developer relations engineer working on Compose. My focus is around helping you migrate to Compose. Today, I'm joined by my teammates.
Hi, my name is Jolanda Verhoef. I also work as a developer relations engineer in the Compose team. I focus on testing, tooling, accessibility, layouts, touch and input, and a lot more areas. And you might recognize me from the recent Mad Skills episodes on Compose phases and constraints and modifier order. So if you have any questions around those, let me know.
Hi, everyone. My name is Simona Stanovic. I work with Yolanda and Chris on Compose. I am an Android developer relations engineer, and my areas are layouts and migration.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrei Shukov, and I'm an engineer on the Compose team. And I mostly focus on the lazy layout and also runtime and compiler on the side.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. If you're tuning in live, I encourage you to participate by asking questions on the chat here on YouTube. Again, this is a Compose layouts and modifiers Q&A, so we're going to prioritize questions around that topic. While we wait for those questions to arrive, we're going to get started by answering the questions you've already asked us. So without further ado, let's move on to our first question. So Faisal asks, is it the right time to migrate existing XML code into Compose? What do we think?
I can take that one. So I would say that quick and simple answer is yes. The more detailed answer, I would say, is still a yes, but it very much depends on your teams and app size, your capacity, what you pretty much think and assess is the best for your requirements in a current time frame. That being said, Compose does offer a number of benefits, so this is something to keep in mind when you're making this decision. It simplifies UI development. It's very powerful. It's much less code, and it comes with very powerful tools, and it's also using intuitive Kotlin APIs. So Compose is definitely the future, and hopefully this helps you make your decision about whether to migrate. When it comes to migration, as the process of migrating from views to Compose, there is a number of resources that can help you kick this off. And Compose was actually built with view interop in mind from the start. So views and Compose work great together, and you can have both in the same code base at the same time. I guess to help you start this process, you can check out our official documentation. There's a lot of blogs and talks on this topic. There is even a sample app that we have that shows this incremental migration step by step. So yeah, to kick off migration incrementally and safely, do check these resources out, and I hope that gives you a nice head start.
Great, that was really thorough. Thank you. All right, the next question is from Divyan. They ask, I'm looking forward to getting started with Android development. What should I use to begin? Jetpack Compose or XML? Who wants to take this?
I can take this one, yeah. It's a good question. Actually, we have a big course. It's finally complete, which is amazing. It has 8 units, which is all about Android development. And this course uses Jetpack Compose. So it helps you to learn with Jetpack Compose from the beginning. We do definitely recommend, if you're new in the field, if you're new to Android, start using Compose, because that is going to be the future. That's where we're aiming to go towards. So, get that started, understand that way of working. And of course, eventually, you will probably have to work with views. You will have to work with XML as well. So that is something that, once you become experienced and well-versed in the way of working with Jetpack Compose, you can also learn how to do things in XML as well.
Great. Yeah, a lot of existing apps are built with Vue, so you definitely still need to learn that, but start with Compose. All right, the next question is, when should I use column versus lazy column? Maybe Andre.
Yeah, I guess I can take that. Yeah, actually, the first layout question in here, which is quite nice. So the answer to column versus lazy column is basically trade-offs. Column is faster on scrolling, but it takes a bit of time to ramp up to create all the elements beforehand. Lazy column is lazy in creating elements. So as you scroll, it creates new elements that come to the screen, to the viewport. And that means that scrolling will be a little bit more laggy because it needs to do the work of creating elements, but at the same time, it doesn't need this ramp up time. So if you have like thousands of elements in there, all the elements are really complex, column will take a lot of time to actually just create itself and all of the elements inside. So that's basically the trade-off that you are facing when you're trying to choose between column and lazy column. And if your column is not scrollable at all, obviously don't try to use lazy, because lazy is only scrollable.
Gotcha. Yeah, it probably also depends on the size of your data set, right? Larger, use lazy.
Yeah, as I mentioned, like if there's thousands of elements, just probably column will take a lot of time to create.
Yeah.
So a lazy column is probably better pick then.
That makes sense. All right, we're getting some good questions on the YouTube chat, so let's move to those questions. Cassio asks, is there a schedule to have all components from Material 2 implemented on Material 3?
I can give an answer on that. there's always a schedule. I mean, we can't really tell you exactly when everything's going to be implemented, but there is a lot of support already in Material 3 for different kinds of components. It is a new material design language, which means that not every concept from Material 2 maps one-on-one to a concept in Material 3. So you might see things that you're used to in Material 2 that aren't implemented that way in Material 3. There is, if you go to Material 3 or m3.material.io, every component does say the status of like how far is the Compose implementation and how far are other implementations. So that's a good way to track kind of what is going on there. And I think, yeah, that's a good thing. We are quite critical of what we put in the material library as well. So we want to make sure that whatever we put in the material libraries is actually about that design language. So it's not just something that a lot of people use, but it's actually something that we have good rules and good APIs for. Other than that, you can always build on top of Foundation. So there's the Foundation library that contains a lot of useful building blocks, so to say. There's the UI library that also contains a bunch of useful things to use. And with that, you can also always build something on top of that. And because Compose is composable, you can even publish and share that with the community.
Yeah, great answer. Yeah, Material 3 is a new design system, so one-to-one mapping might not make sense. So yeah, definitely look into our M3 docs to learn more. Okay, the next question is, will there be scroll support out of the box for lazy column? Does anyone want to take this? I think.
Well, yeah, I can try to answer that, but because in first place, lazy column is already scrollable. The whole concept of lazy in there is built on being scrollable, and as you scroll, you add more items. The question may be about nested scroll support, and that's something I could just communicate with more. So there are two things with the nested scroll in scrollable containers in Compose. So the first one is if you have a scrollable container that is like in different directions. For example, you have a lazy column that scrolls vertically, and you want to put lazy rows that goes horizontally. And this is like the nested scroll that already works in it. But there are cases when you want to nest like lazy column inside of lazy column, so they both scroll in the vertical direction, or you just have a column with the vertical scroll and you want to put lazy column inside of it. And this is the thing that doesn't really work in Compose, because the column with the vertical scroll kind of create this infinite canvas inside. And lazy column just doesn't know what side it should be. So there is no reuse, there is no kind of lazy semantics to that. And that's why we forbid nesting lazy column inside the vertical scroll containers, such as lazy column itself, lazy column, lazy column, lazy columns, vertical scroll. And I'm not sure at the moment if you're going to address that because the system works as it is. You could theoretically, if you still want to have the elements that are vertically scrollable inside the scrollable container, what you can do is to limit the size of those elements, basically saying that, okay, so this lazy column that is nested inside in our scrollable container will be 50 dp maximum. And that will make sure that a lazy column knows about its size and it can efficiently reuse elements, and it will allow you to nest it inside the scrollable container.
Awesome, thanks,
I
Andre.
can quickly add just like one more potential resolution that I've seen that can help in this scenario. You can either set the fixed height or width to the nested child, or what I've seen is actually people trying to nest the same direction lists. So a column and then a nested lazy column, when all they could be doing, and pretty much the use case, what it dictates is to have one lazy column and then use different item or items DSL blocks to emit different type of content, and you get the same result basically, but you avoid this issue that we have. So that's potentially another way of resolving this, I think.
One more thing that I would like to add there as well is, if you need to override, not per se nested scrolling, but you do want to do some sort of scrolling before actually starting to scroll your lazy column, for example, you can on a higher level also intercept the touch, which is possible I think what coordinator layout does under the hood. So you kind of first capture from the parent view, capture that the pointer input basically, do your own scroll first, and then just forward it to the children.
Great. I love questions where everyone chimes in. Thank you, everyone. Okay, moving on to the next question. In what scenarios should I create a custom layout versus using Compose out-of-the-box ones? Who wants to take this?
I can take this. So it's a very good question, and it's actually a question that we've seen being asked quite frequently. My assumption is that it's a frequent question because coming from the view system, people in general found creating custom views and view groups, custom layouts in general, right, to be quite daunting and not the nicest experience overall. And I think that's one potential reason why we get this question, because people are still kind of, being wary of doing this even in Compose. But what we can for sure say is that custom layouts and building custom layouts and working with custom layouts is much simpler and easier in Compose. And there's a number of resources that we have currently available from our GitHub repository with all of our Compose samples that show exactly how you can build a custom layout that looks fairly complex by design, but in the actual implementation, it's much simpler than you would expect. So that's one way of tackling custom layouts and checking out and ensure yourself to see how easy it is to actually use a custom layout. When it comes to choosing whether you need it or not, Compose does offer a lot of out-of-the-box solutions that you can already use to build intricate designs. But for example, one way of deciding whether you need a custom layout or not is if your design contains elements that are very dependent on each other. So their sizing and positioning is every element sizing and positioning is super dependent on all of the other ones. So there's like a correlation and quite an intricate cycle of dependencies for positioning and placing these items. If there is something like that, then I think custom layouts would be the way to go, because it would simplify your composable quite a lot. So that's one way of choosing.
Okay. Yeah, and I think you dive into this in one of the Mad Skills episodes as well.
Yeah, precisely, yeah.
All right. Okay, so the next question is from Techniques6. So there will be no XML layouts. I think what this person is trying to ask is, you don't need to use XML with Compose?
You don't.
Well, XML is a language, right? So that, let's say we don't need any XML anymore is maybe a bit of a overstatement. We still have a strings.xml, for example, which uses some very, very useful things under the hood. But this question is specifically about XML layouts. And in a full Compose app, I don't think you need any XML layouts, do we?
That's right. Yeah. I think for existing apps, right, where you have existing layouts built using XML, you can interoperate between Compose and views. But I think if you're creating new layouts, right, and you're using Compose, use Compose. No XML needed.
I can be really honest. I don't think I've written an XML layout file in a long time. And once you don't do that anymore, it's hard to go back.
It is very hard to go back. I +1 to that.
When you start working on migration, is there an area you had to work? You need to remember that.
You feel the pain, I think.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Precisely.
I mean, for me, in the beginning, the XML layouts were kind of the thing that I never really liked to work with completely, because you had to create their custom previews in that, and it's really hard to connect with data, and Compose kind of alleviates a lot of that. You just kind of provide the data model, and the layouts preview just works for you in that case, and all of that. So it's awesome and much quicker to iterate when you just try to quickly prototype and do something.
That's right. As you can tell, we love Compose. All right,
We should
let's move on
invite
to the
like a
next.
non-compose. Yeah, we should have a non-compose person on this team to kind of have a logical counter balance.
Well, I guess there are some use cases, right? There are advanced use cases where you might have to use XML. One example I can think of is like some SDKs have, they expose their integration using fragments. So you have to bring fragments in Compose. In that case, the way to add a fragment in Compose is to actually create an XML file for the fragment container view. And then you would use Android view binding to bring that fragment in Compose. So there are still some scenarios where you're going to need XML, but I think, the decision tree is try to use Compose first, right? And if you hit a roadblock, then that's where you might have to reach into XML.
Yeah, and that I think is one of the strengths, right? Like the moment you actually do get blocked, you're one step away, one Android view away from going back to the view system and doing things for a part of your screen in another, in the XML way.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so the next question is, when should I use modifier.align by baseline? Our first modifier question.
If you want to align things by baseline, but I'll let you, Sim, answer it in more detail.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory in terms of the naming, right? But I guess the practical usage that you most often see is when working with text composables. In the practical sense, like if you visually try to imagine having a row, right? And inside that row, you have multiple text composables. Some of them might have different fonts. Some of them might have different font sizes. So by default, they might not be aligned as the same way that you would expect them to be, which is by the baseline, right, of the text. So modifier aligned by baseline actually ensures that whenever it's applied to a specific child within that row, then all of those children would be aligned by the baseline of their text, no matter the font, no matter the size. However, it is important to know that this modifier only works with children to which it is applied to. So it's applied on an element basis, not on a row basis, right? So yeah, I guess that kind of answers it without trying to do an actual visualization of this.
Great. Anyone want to add anything else? Pretty straightforward, yeah. Okay. The next question is from Naresh. How to migrate the application built using Java into Compose? I can probably take this, but Simona, maybe you want to chime in as well. Compose is entirely written in Kotlin. I think Kotlin allows you to write equivalent code in a much less verbose way with Java. So I think that's a pretty exciting opportunity to migrate to Kotlin. But the migration strategy doesn't look any different, right? We have, as Simona talked about, we have a documentation page telling you on how you can migrate an existing Vue-based app into Compose, but it doesn't really look any different. What's nice about Kotlin, right, is that it does also interoperate with Java. So if you can essentially use the two. Does anyone want to add anything that I might have missed? Okay, going once. All right, let's move on to the next question then. Noid asks, sometimes I create reusable composable functions and pass multiple modifiers in it, like divider modifier, button modifier, etc. Is passing multiple modifiers in a function an anti-pattern?
Can I? Not in and of itself, I would say. Like the one thing we do say is pass a top level modifier, right? Like the parameter that you should pass as the first required parameter, non-required parameter is like the modifier, and you should apply that to the outermost composable that you're calling in your composable. It is definitely possible to pass more than one and to basically pass it on to one of the children of your of your tree. But I would consider at that point that maybe you might want to go do a slot API instead. So instead of passing these modifiers, can you maybe just pass the composables? So you would have one parameter, which is basically called divider, which you pass another composable in. And that way you have more flexibility, not only for by using modifiers, but you have the flexibility by being able to fill in the resulting thing yourself.
Yep. Anyone want to add anything else?
Also, to shamelessly promote Matt Skills, this is also covered in one of the episodes, so
that's right.
Check it out.
Yeah, modifier chaining is definitely encouraged and not an anti-pattern. Okay, next question is from Tyler. When will scroll bars be supported for lazy layouts? There was a similar question earlier to this.
I think like I could comment on that a little bit. So we have scroll bar support in our roadmap, but right now we don't have exact estimation date because like there are some other things that kind of get it a bit bundled up. So there is a bit of the community support from that regard. We have a few libraries that already add support for lazy layouts, in particular lazy column, lazy grids, and maybe lazy stagger grid, but I'm not sure. So this is something that you could at least rely on. But in general, supporting scroll bars is like, I'm pretty sure scroll bars in itself is not as big a thing, so you could try to kind of create them themselves in your app as well.
Great. Yeah. Did we talk about the Compose roadmap? I don't know if we gave a shout out to that, but we actually have the roadmap visible in our documentation page, which you can see there. If there's a feature that is not in the roadmap that you're curious about, you can always file an issue in our issue tracker. That's a great way to kind of, put in an official request for these sorts of things. Okay, so the next question is from Argus. I noticed that recycler view is faster and smoother than lazy column or lazy vertical grid. Can you guys explain how they are different underneath, and are there any performance differences?
I can take this one.
Okay, go.
I think the main thing to keep in mind is be careful, be mindful of saying things about performance when you run your app in the emulator or when you run your app on your device while you're developing it. Because Compose, by the way it is built in debug builds, is not extremely performant. But then when you create your release build and when you actually do the whole thing of like, creating the APK, publishing it through the Play Store, the moment you create a release build, that performance is completely different. So keep that thing in mind. We do have a YouTube video as well on like performance gotchas, which is this is mentioned in there as well. So that's like step number one, is make sure you test with a release build. Then there are some gotchas, especially when it comes to like state that is changing a lot. So when you have state that is continuously changing, that can lower your performance. There's debugging tools around that nowadays. There is like videos to help you with those kind of things and building better performance apps. I think in lazy lists, that is especially apparent because like if you scroll quickly, anything that you built that wasn't performant, you're going to see it, right? If you still are dealing with performance issues in a release build and by going through these issues, please raise it with us. We have been working with a lot of partners and we have done a lot of testing, and we are quite confident that we're making a lot of performance improvements. I know, Simona, you recently were working on some performance improvements regarding modifiers, right?
Yeah, there were some that could kind of potentially impact this lazy list as well. But it was in regards to reusing modifiers, so extracting them and setting them as, just regular vowels outside of your lazy lists, and then applying the same object to all of the items inside your lazy list. So that could help a bit with the performance, but it wouldn't be necessarily a game changer in this case.
And what about, because there's some internal refactorings going on as well, right? Like I remember that there's some improvements being made to modifiers under the hood. I remember Leland at some point talked about this at a conference, right?
Yeah, I think like Leland shared a bit on that with the on Android Dev Summit. So the new API, it's called modifier node, and it kind of restructures how we reuse the internal structures of the modifiers themselves, and it's be really beneficial for performance and reuse in a lazy list. Overall, like this topic of how this recycle U is different from the lazy column is a really long thing, and I could talk about like for an hour or so. So probably it's a good topic for the conference talk in the future. Let's not do it today as much. But the things to know about is like first, lazy column, as Yolanda already mentioned, lazy column is only as performant as the elements inside of it. So like if you have something that is really heavy, it may be worth splitting into multiple lazy column items. For example, if you have like a column inside lazy column as an item, that probably worth splitting into multiple items. So a lazy column could prefetch them incrementally. But in general, Recycle U right now reuses a bit more from the composition itself. Like if you use Android Compose use in the Recycle U, they just keep like stale state in there, and it could cause some problems with focus, with ripples or like different drawings in there, while Compose does reset that state. So like your disposable effects fire between reused items, and we clean the state between those. And that's why reusing modifiers is really beneficial for the lazy column performance in the future. And right now we're working on recreating many of our modifiers, like refactoring those into this new API that will allow at least like for clickable and focusable and many more modifiers to be more performant in your layout, and you won't see as many performance drops. You use a lot of modifiers together with the complex elements.
Cool. Yeah, a lot of performance gains to come. And this might be a good segue to the next question, which is also performance related. Koti asks, will there be any impact on performance if we use more columns with Compose View?
I guess it's like depends on the number of columns. So like each column kind of adds a little bit of overhead, obviously. It's much cheaper than linear layout in itself, and many other things like in the view world. So you could feel free to just run, just add up columns and compose them together in the way that you want to create your layout. But kind of be aware that if you, for example, try to put like thousands of columns inside the view, it's still not going to scale as well.
Yeah. So unlike the view system, Compose is like a single layout pass, measure pass, right? So mostly less of a concern. Okay. Moving on to our next question. Tyler asks, so many Compose features are marked experimental. How concerned should we be using these features in production apps? Are these features moving towards non-experimental soon?
Can I?
Please.
So it is important to understand what the experimental annotations mean. And basically, things are marked when we mark something as stable, so not as experimental, we guarantee that we're not going to change that API, so the parameters or the name of the method or anything, unless we do a full top level version update. So we could not update that API until Compose 2.0. And that's quite a big commitment. So we try to make those commitments, but we also keep things in experimental, sometimes maybe a little bit longer, just to make sure that we do have that API straight and we do have that correct. That doesn't mean that we're just going to change everything all of the time, right? So the fact that something is in a stable release in general means that you can kind of rely on the behavior. We tested it, there is automated tests for the behavior, and it's not just going to be pulled out of from under you. So I think that's the short answer. If you use stable releases, even if something is marked as experimental, we are adding more like more reasoning behind it as well. Like we try to now explain why something is marked as experimental, because it can be very different. Sometimes something is experimental just for us to get the feedback from the community before like stabilizing it. Sometimes it might be because we're really like still working under the hood on it. But yeah, keep in mind that most of all, it just means that we cannot change the API if we mark it as stable.
Right. Yeah, it won't be a breaking change to your point unless it's a major upgrade in the version.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next question from Dean. What are some tips for debugging custom Compose layouts when things don't look or behave as expected? I think we have some tooling around this to help with this.
We have a layout inspector, but I'm wondering what that does with custom layouts would for each of the child's layouts would show something, right?
Yeah, I think like layout code is still like regular Kotlin code in a way. So you can debug it as usual. Like for example, when we were writing like lazy layouts, we were mostly trying to kind of look into interactions with scroll and kind of debug in certain edge cases and stuff like that. But if you're trying to debug exactly like position and drawing and figure out like what goes where, I guess like the best tool, as Chris already mentioned, is a layout inspector.
Yeah, there's also an episode on this on the previous Mad Skills Compose basics around tooling to debug this. So I talk about the layout inspector and other tools within the Android Studio IDE to help with that.
And I mean, as obvious as it sounds, it's actually like having previews helps immensely with this, because it is something, as we mentioned, like that was significantly missing from the view system, and it's quite a massive improvement in Compose to be able to see your, composables within a preview with live literals and changes being made in real time, right? So it's not per se debugging, but it actually helps uncover potential issues under the hood quite more quickly.
Yeah, good shout out to previews. I feel like that the introduction of that really changed the way we kind of debug and build UI, right? Like you don't have to deploy to a device to actually see what you're writing. So very good. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Why should we use, this is a modifier question, why should we use composed always when creating custom modifiers? We have a good answer here.
Well, the answer is don't. Rather not. Yeah, Andre, maybe you can explain when you would need it.
Yeah, as Yellow said, so it's you don't have to use it every time, and it's actually a bit of the anti-pattern. So the composed modifier is the reason for many performance issues that we have with modifiers at the moment, because we try to kind of access composition locals in that, or we try to remember certain values like associated with the node and stuff. So I guess like I'm not sure if the modifier node API is stabilized yet, and probably it's this node. It's going to be like stabilized in the next release. But before that, the composed is only needed when you have certain associated with the particular node. So like when you cannot express something in terms of like layout or a drawing or something like that, when you have only some kind of like information, I don't know what's even like some kind of state associated with the node that you want to add to that. That's where you would use modifier compose, because the compose lambda that you provide in there, it is executed next to each of the nodes, and it kind of creates each own copy of the state for each of the nodes you provide it to. So it's like a good scalable mechanism, but at the same time, it's not really performant. And like in the recent updates, we're trying to migrate all the modifier compose to the modifier node. So I think ideally, I'm not sure if that's the exact North Star that we're trying to achieve, but ideally, majority of the modifier composed will be removed and changed to the modifier node. So I recommend you exploring that API. I think it's already existing in 5.4 in experimental state. And it allows to implement majority of the things that Modifier Compose allowed you to before.
All right, thank you. So let's move on to the next one. Francis asks, do I still need to use constraint layout? Is that still necessary?
You don't have to. So as we said before, like nesting rows and columns in Compose is not a big performance hit. Like we're completely fine with deeply nested UIs. And so constraint layout was often used as kind of a way to prevent deeply nesting in views. So you don't need it for that optimization anymore. You can still use it if you have like constraints, like a lot of views that are dependent, a lot of composables that are dependent on each other. And you think that using constraint layout is a more readable way of explaining and writing down those constraints. I don't use it often when I'm implementing designs. I feel like mostly I can get away with rows and columns and boxes. But it's also a matter of preference. And I would say there's not a big reason against it, but there's also not a big reason for it. One thing that is interesting is we also have motion layout, which builds on top of constraint layout, which is basically implementing animations. And it might be nice to kind of write down how your composables are related to each other and then how they are related to each other after an animation, because it makes it easier to kind of write down that motion layout animations.
I think also the important part. Yeah, go ahead.
Go, Andre.
Okay. Yeah, the important part here is that like in Compose, it's much easier to implement custom layouts, right? And constraint layout was kind of used in place of the custom layout in many cases to try to explain the same thing with constraints. And I agree with you, sometimes it's easy to just explain all of these dependencies between items in constraint layout. Sometimes it's easier to implement those things in rows and columns, but there's also the third path with Compose to just implementing your own custom layouts. And I found it much more kind of flexible in many ways to expressing all different dependencies between items. Kind of coming back to the answer that already was mentioned here when we talk about custom layouts.
Yeah, exactly. That's I just wanted to jump in. That one of the examples where I saw constraint layout being used in Compose could have actually been resolved by using rows and columns and the APIs that come with it, which are alignment and arrangements. Again, we cover this in math skills, and it's a kind of a difficult thing to explain without visual examples. But do check it out, because in a lot of cases, it's actually what people were trying to achieve with constraint layout, which is like the relative positioning of children inside lists. And it's just actually super easy to do now with rows and columns and their APIs.
Yeah, just to add to that, like if you're migrating like a constraint, like view-based constraint layout, don't assume you need is the keyword, constraint layout in Compose. You kind of decide what works best, because as pretty much everyone here mentioned, you don't get that performance penalty if you have nested rows and columns and so on, unlike in views. Okay, so the next question we have is, when should I use sub-compose layout? Perhaps Andre might have a good answer.
It's an interesting question, because like I remember when we had like a talk for the DroidCon London last year, we were kind of scrambling to find a case that is not covered by existing sub-compose layouts. So overall, you are probably already using sub-compose layout. Lazy column, any kind of lazy layout is a sub-compose layout in itself. A box with constraints is sub-compose layout, and there are probably a few more that are frequently used. So the typical use for the sub-compose layout is when you don't know exactly what you put inside of it. So you don't know exactly what the content of it should be, and you figure out what the content is during measure. So like when you think about Compose and how like we structure and create elements in there. There is composition phase, and there's layout and draw, and like you kind of with the subcompose layout, you defer these composition decisions until you have the layout information, like about the size, maybe like in a lazy layout, also information about like the scroll position and many more. So probably like there are not that many cases for the custom subcompose layout, but if you find yourself that you don't know what kind of elements you should put inside the layout until you know the size, probably that's a good use case for the subcompose layout itself. And I think box with constraints kind of covers a lot of those already.
Awesome. Okay, so our next question from Sally: which architecture is best for Compose app? What do you think?
I could go if you want. Yeah. In the end, architecture is about your whole application, and Compose is only about your UI, right? It's only about, okay, how do I translate the data that I want to show on the screen to an actual UI on my screen? And the other way around, how do I feed information back to the rest of my app? Things like, talking to the network or accessing a database should all be done somewhere else in your architecture. We do have a best practice or like a recommendation from modern Android development on how to architect your app, and Compose works really well with that. So if you do the data layer, domain layer, and UI layer concept using view models, etc., we know that that plays a really nice part, or that really connects well. But if you want to set it up in a different way, the most important thing is that you're able to kind of feed a flow of data into the UI so that we basically can work in a declarative way and just render a given state at a given point in time. And you're able to kind of accept events happening from your UI and react to those.
Yeah, great call out. We have opinionated guidance on architecture in our documentation, so definitely do check that out. Okay, so the next question we have from Play Ali. What is the fastest way to make the switch from XML to Compose and also migrate my ongoing projects? A lot of things to migrate here.
I can kind of take this as well, but Chris also, because you're the migration person here, we can just jump in, please, if there's anything more to add. I think so it depends what you mean switch from XML to Compose layout. Do you mean in a completely new app or for an existing feature? Right now, what we're saying is if you're building a new app or if you have a new feature to build in a potentially modularized app, then Compose is definitely the way to go. Because of really good interop connection with the view system, like we mentioned, migrating incrementally and safely, step by step, is actually very possible. So the fastest way would be to add a Compose dependency to your project, set it up for Compose, run it, and start building your new screens, new features, or your entirely new app in Compose. Like we mentioned previously, there's extensive documentation and samples on migration specifically. So do feel free to check it out because it actually provides precise strategies as to how you can approach migration depending on your requirements. So yeah, that might be a good starting point.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think one of my favorite features is that, yeah, you can build new features in Compose even if you have an existing view-based app. So that's definitely like the first step, I'd say, before you even think about existing code. Like build your new features in Compose so that it's taking advantage of the benefits of Compose. Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for our viewers for watching and asking all these great questions. Sorry we couldn't get to everything. They're all really good questions. That said, that concludes our Q&A. Next up, we're going to hear from our friends at Concepts, which has seen amazing usage on tablets and large screen. Enjoy the rest of the show, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Concepts is a sketching app used by visual thinkers for note-taking, ideation, doodling, whatever it takes for them to get the ideas out of their head into the world. My name's David Britton. I'm co-founder and CEO of Top Hatch, who develop Concepts. I started coding, it's going to date me, on something called the ZX Spectrum. It'll also, show my British roots. My dad was a coder before me. He started coding when there were just 2 computers in England. I guess you could say it runs in the family. Large screens are very important for Concepts. The more space our users have, the better. We find that users spend 70% more time in Concepts on tablets compared to phones. Low latency and performance are so fundamental to the Concepts experience because we don't want to break the illusion. We want the user to feel like they're drawing on paper so they can just forget about it being digital. It should just feel natural. Another really important consideration for us is making sure that Concepts feels at home on the platform, but we're also matching with the way Android works. Will it be used on a couch, in a coffee shop? Each of those likely means different modes of usage. Android has, a mature set of APIs, and that makes it very easy for us to test and debug on the right screen sizes and the right form factors. Recently, the support for emulators for larger screen devices and Chrome OS devices has really improved. The emulators are fantastic for their fidelity. We spend most of our time in Android Studio developing. Kotlin was already a mature language, and so it's really nice, clean, concise, compact, understandable code. If you're considering building a tablet app, it's really important to think about the context and how you might take advantage of that bigger screen. People use tablets in quite different ways to their phone. On a phone, a user may scribble some quick notes, then they might move to a tablet, and then they might move to a Chrome OS device at a desk, export them, insert them into Google Docs. When thinking about bringing your app to tablet, please make sure that it works in landscape mode and that your interface adapts. It makes so much difference. If you'd like to learn more about developing for large screen, head to this link.
Well, that's a wrap on this year's Android Show.
Yes. So this means we can now go grab tapas somewhere.
Well, we'll take care of that. But before we go, don't forget to check out our Math Skills series, where you'll be able to dive deeper in the world of Compose layout and modifiers, including some of the things we covered in the Q&A.
Plus, to learn more about developing for large screens and Wear with Wear OS,
just visit developer.android.com, where we have interactive galleries and guides to help you get started.
And let's continue the conversation on Twitter or in the comments to share with us what you want to hear about next time.
See you next time, right here on the Android Show.
Bye!
Okay, so which one of these devices are we going to use to find food?
Good idea.